What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. The Beyond UX Design shop is open. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some of my favorite UX and software-related quotes, or pick up some digital downloads and print them yourself. Get your copy of Beyond UX Design, master your craft beyond pixels and prototypes. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to get your print on. This week's episode is brought to you by Wix Studio. If you're thinking about redoing your portfolio or kicking off a new website project, listen up. I've only got 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprise. So here are a few things that you can do from start to finish in 30 seconds or less on Studio. You can adapt your designs for every device with responsive AI, jump seamlessly between front-end and back-end. You can speed up projects with an AI code assistant, start a design library. You can reuse full-stack apps and UI components across multiple sites. Well, time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Wix to start creating today. This week's episode is brought to you by the UX Playbook, your roadmap to UX career success. Created by my buddy Chris Wynn, UX Playbook offers comprehensive guides on UX fundamentals, portfolio creation, and job hunting. With hundreds of videos, Notion guides, and real-world examples, it's your one-stop shop for career clarity. And because you're an amazing listener, get 10% off their Fast Track bundle using the code BEYOND at checkout. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/playbook and save nearly $25. So pick up the UX Playbook and transform your career from fuzzy to focused. And if you haven't done already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Roddy, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, and Marty for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. And you can get instant access right now for as little as $5 a month. That's a steal. For more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So here's an interesting conundrum that educators are often facing when it comes to teaching new designers. How do you teach a student something today when it might be totally different years from now when they're actually ready to get their first job? Those hard skills, they're changing all the time, but there is something that we learn usually by trial and error on our own after we're out of school, and those are those foundational soft skills that we need to learn to really improve our career and grow beyond that junior designer role. So I am so excited to have Erica Heinz on today. She's the author of the new book that just came out, Designing in 4D. And I am so excited to have Erica on the show. Erica Heinz has over 20 years of experience working as a digital designer and strategist in New York City, creating apps, websites, products, and services that are popular with millions of people. She's taught undergraduate and graduate design classes at Parsons School of Design and the School of Visual Arts. She's led prototyping and user experience labs in Fortune 100 accelerators and New York City incubators, and spoken on topics from creative culture all the way to CSS. So Erica, I can't think of anybody else more qualified to talk about this than you. Welcome to Beyond UX Design. How's it going?
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Yeah, I think we have a lot in common, so I'm excited to dig into this
Right
stuff.
on. Yeah, well, I'm all about the soft skills here on Beyond UX Design, hence the name, Beyond the design part. So tell us a little bit about you before we get started. You've been doing teaching and stuff for a long time, so I'm really excited to see how we can get students and new designers to think more about these foundational skills. But tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I started off as a graphic designer, went to school for that and was interested in the internet and web design, but it was something that my professors completely didn't know. So I was self-taught and all of that. It was just the era where there weren't higher level education courses. It was everyone just kind of figuring it out together and like building the web together, just like view source, like how's this work?
Yeah.
And so, I moved to New York and was just freelancing. It was the time when everybody needed a website and there weren't things like Squarespace that made it easy to do. So I was just kind of like, I actually didn't want to tell people I was a web designer because everyone wanted to tell me about the website they needed. So it was just, finding a lot of cool freelance opportunities like in fashion and human rights, just in small businesses around the city. Did some full-time stints at like a small design studios where I learned like actual print production and how to send files to press and those sorts of tactical skills. And then it was like, okay, now I need to like learn web design. And so worked at like a large software company where again, I learned how like includes and servers worked. Yeah, just kind of like self-taught throughout my career, just because that was kind of how you had to learn this stuff. And it just kind of stuck with me. So that's always been something that I try to help students who it's hard when you're young and you're like coming up through this very structured thing of like, this semester we're doing this and this, like to kind of flip and be like, what am I doing? Like, how am I still kind of shaping my career? So yeah, have still been a consultant. Yeah, so a consultant for most of my career, kind of moving then from design into UX design specifically, and then now also more into UX strategy. So that's been kind of the evolution for me.
Awesome. And you've got a new book that just came out, Think in 4D, Design Brilliant User Experiences and Valuable Digital Products. And obviously, I think the book talks a little bit about the hard skills, but there's also a large portion of the book that talks about soft skills. So I'm really excited to dig into this with you today. And I assume as a graphic designer doing print layout and things like that, did you design your own book or did you like hand it off and let someone else kind of do it?
I did. Yeah. So I self-published because I needed to retain the IP. It's kind of like my life's work where my lawyer was like, you're the one person I would advise to self-publish because it's drawn from all my years of teaching and professional practice. And yeah, as a design control freak, I wanted to like have control over the cover and the title, and I wanted to over design kind of the interior, which I went ahead and shipped it. Like again, I'm like you can spend years on these things, but I was like, no, it's better if it gets out a little bit sooner. But yeah, it's all like full color interior, like fully designed. So yeah,
well, I haven't gotten a hard copy of the book, but the digital stuff that I've seen looks very nice.
Yeah,
whoever did it, if you didn't do it, somebody did it. It looks great.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. So I love, we were talking a couple of months back, I can't remember, and you said something that has really stuck with me, and I think this is so true. Software, technology, it's evolving constantly. How do you teach a student something today when it might be totally different tomorrow? And you talked about, as an educator, you want to teach them these hard skills, but is it better to teach them that thing or is it better to teach them how to learn new things as they go? And I'm curious from your perspective as an educator, can you like dig into that a little bit? Because I think students, they get so hung up on teach me this, but it's a teach a man a fish versus, giving them a fish. So I don't know, from your perspective as an educator, tell me a little bit about that. I don't know if that's a paradox or whatever it is, but talk a little bit about that.
It definitely is kind of a paradox because, you can try to deliver these kind of conceptual skills that will last people a lifetime. I'm still using the kind of abstract typography skills or like, the reasoning skills I learned in school. Whereas learning Quark, like nobody's even heard of Quark anymore. So,
sure, yeah.
That stuff will fade. But at the same time, when you say, okay, now we've got these ideas, go and make something. If students can't work Figma, they can't render the thing, and they spend hours. My students say, you don't realize how slow we are. You don't realize. So it is that thing of like, you have to be able to like drive the car, but like you have to also know where you're trying to go. So it's been a thing where I come back to is like, well, what's the best use of our time together? And so Figma, for example, is really good at putting out these playground files that like are fun. And like I do kind of everyone that comes out, there's tons of tutorials, there's tons of conference stuff. So that's just one where I'm like, you don't need me. I'm not even the best person to walk you through this. There's so many online resources. And again, the technical skills are kind of much more clear and they're not the fuzzy back and forth where like learning typography is something where you kind of need to critique it and have some back and forth. So I think that's maybe a good line of like, if it's something where critique is a big part of it, then that's a good spot for like in-person or higher level education. But so that's, I think the process is also one where, we know as professionals, it's always like, it depends. It's custom,
right,
really how the design process works is you get some people in a room and something happens dependent on those people, like which people those are. But you can't, again, start from zero with that. So you have to kind of be like, okay, here's this 5-step process. So first we, research and first, and so it makes it so you at least have like that skeleton. But then in the real world, it's all about like reading the room. Yeah. And like adapting to like the context and the situation.
Yeah. And as we progress in our career, often, this is something I've experienced and I'm sure a lot of people do is, junior designers are given a task and they go off and they do it. And what I've found is as you progress in your career, you get put on the spot more. a lot of times. Like someone will in a meeting ask you, what do you think we should do about blah, blah, blah? And I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know, let's go find out and I'll come back. But often we're asked to kind of like give that insight right then and there. And the ability to read the room, understand who your audience is, and be able to translate what's in your head in a way that those people can understand, especially, very technical things like we're going to use a lot of buzzwords and all that crap. But if you're talking to a bunch of designers, that's fine. If you're talking to the head of something else, some technical lead or something that has no idea about design, and you're in there and you start spouting stuff off and you're not reading the room, like you said, like that's a skill that you're never going to learn in school. And that's just a really great example. But then I also think about like the hard skills too. Like, you mentioned typography. This is a really great example. Whether you're using Figma or Quark or Flash or Word or drawing on the pen and paper, those typography skills are also like kind of evergreen, right? I mean, so that's an interesting thing where, I could teach you how to set type in Figma, but what I also need to teach you is why does that type pairing work? Why does that line height need to be changed? Why is that text too tight? How do you, adjusting kerning and things like that, where those kinds of things are, I don't know, boot camps probably aren't teaching those things. Your 4-year degree, I hope like a design is teaching, there's at least a class about typography and things like that. But anyway, those are interesting things too, where, teaching you how to do it in Quark versus teaching how to do it in Figma, that's less important than the theories and the concepts about, how to do it. And I don't know, I want to call that out. I just love that.
Yeah, I think that's like, typography, like color theory, all these kind of like systems where you're learning and not, I mean, sure, you could jump into Canva and copy something you saw on Instagram and kind of like make it look in a similar style or similar personality, but that's not going to help you like, put a typographic system together and see white space and see like relationships and personality through, type. So I think it's that systems thinking and not just like, which button to push to, right align it. And then, back to your point about just like the communicate, like being put on the spot. I remember that was a big lesson for me is coming out of art school where it was like in art school, it's like, oh, the work should speak for itself, right? We do this critique and, it's good, it's clear. And it was such a shock to be in the business world and like realize it's like half about the communication that these people did, most of your audience did not go to art school. And like, you need to show them how it's, tell them how it's solving the problem and explain again in language that they can understand. And that's different. I remember, the big tech company I worked at, we've been working on this thing for 6 months and, it's presenting to the board and I just like rattling off everything. And they were like, Erica, this is the board. Like you can't talk like that to like a bunch of like high level executives. And I was like, oh, right. So it's like knowing how to customize the story. So that storytelling aspect, that kind of just, empathy, like human connection sort of aspect where, TikTok talks a lot about like personality hires, but we all have to like, work on a personality that works for creative work and collaboration. And it's hard to get out of that. Like I'm making this thing and it's my art project and it's my portfolio piece and I made a website, I made an app. And it's like, no, you're like collaborating on this whole thing. It's just a really different perspective.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. As an educator, you've got students, and this is the thing, like I remember this when I was younger. I want to learn how to show me how to do this. Show me how to do that. I've got all these questions about tactical, show me how to execute. And you think about like kind of questions I get when I'm doing mentor sessions or something or online, LinkedIn, you see this like, how do I create a portfolio? How do I do this? How do I blah, blah, blah? And, you mentioned this is sort of like, I could teach you how to do that very specific thing, but I need to teach you how to think about the thing critically so that you can do what's best for that specific context. I'm curious, as an educator, how do you manage that? How do you shift the question from, well, I could teach you how to do that very specific thing, but here's what you need to take into account. How do you do that as an educator, and how do you get those students to sort of shift that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I just taught this summer like a 5-session class, just a short kind of teaser for SVA's Masters in Interaction Design. And so that was one where I was like, the UI is coming. Day 4, we are going to dig into Figma, like save your Figma questions for day 4. Like I will show you how to animate. I will show you how to make things, sparkle, but we're going to get there, So again, I think it's just that trust. You have to kind of get the students to trust you of like, we're going to get to those pieces. And then sometimes it is like, let's have some fun. Let's make something sparkle and like, let you be in that right brain space of just like, looking and playing and just thinking visually and not kind of doing all the UXy analysis. But I think it is just like that hard part of, God, all the memes online about like, what is UX and UI, that people, we use these words and we're talking about different things and we have different expectations. So that to me is like the core of, getting into the UX is like that process leading up to the UI. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with just wanting to really dig into UI, but I just would just not call that UX, that's more of, again, just really wanting to be an excellent motion designer or like, an excellent kind of interface designer. But so I think for me, that was part of why I wrote the book, because I was like, what are we talking about? Everyone's fixated on these 2D dimensions, but we have to, like, UX is about 3D, like environments and people, and the 4D kind of like moments and relationships over time. So that's, again, how this framework for myself, like, really also helped the students to be like, all right, we're in like that interaction phase, and we're in the 2D layer now, or like we're in the 4D layer now. It just kind of helped orient them.
Yeah, I love that. So let me ask you this, like, this is something else I see, and I'm always interested in talking to educators about this, the disconnect between what you learn in school and the real world. And you mentioned this before, you had quite a shock when you go and they don't know this art theory that I've been taught. So when you are teaching students in school, that sort of, process and linear process, happy path kind of stuff versus what it's like in the real world and what your team is looking for, what your managers are looking for when you actually do get a job. I'm curious how that is sort of something that because you've had real world experience, so you obviously know this. How do you teach that in school, to share those insights and say, look, you're learning these hard skills, blah, 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 but this is the real, how does that work? I've always been fascinated by how to do that effectively.
Yeah, I think there's different, sometimes it can just be like exercises where it's like, you're forcing someone to work collaboratively and they don't want to. New York, there's a lot of pressure for students like who are trying to get green cards and trying to get internships and trying to be able to stay in the city or stay in the country. So I recognize, their pressure of like, no, they really do need a portfolio. And they really do want to be able to prove these job skills that they're seeing. But it's like that maturity thing of like, how can we break it down so that you understand, like, you're starting to develop a point of view. I think especially for like higher level education, like graduate school, that's part of why you're there, is to kind of have that time to figure out your own personal point of view on all of this. Because I saw somebody on LinkedIn or whatever saying like, I don't review UX portfolios anymore. It's too different. It used to be like there was a certain kind of template or certain sorts of things they needed to fulfill. The industry is just big now, right? The internet is just giant. It's not like we can say like, this is, how to do UX. It's like, well, are you working in government? Are you working in healthcare? Are you working at a startup? Are you working at a, giant corporation? So like coming back to like how you ground that for students, I think it's just, really being there as a person. Like, I'm a consultant. I'm teaching you a consultant way of thinking, which is to kind of see the patterns, to kind of have an outsider's view that you're bringing to the problem versus, again, if you're in a big corporation, it's a lot about like kind of very specific, a very detailed flow. You're kind of like digging in. So it's just kind of like finding ways that they might enjoy collaboration. They might kind of see a sense of like, we're all working on something bigger. So that's been kind of how I've approached it.
I love that. Yeah, that's been like the hardest thing too for me, because I actually work with a boot camp and I get multiple students every cohort. And one of the things that I often struggle with is how to teach them. Like, I can say it all day long. I can tell them all day long, but it's really difficult to actually show them. And like an example would be, well, you're coming up with this idea for this portfolio piece, but there's no way to validate whether or not that data exists anywhere. Right? For you to even build this app, like, you want to build this thing and aggregate this data, but what if that data doesn't actually exist? The whole thing is sort of worthless. So, it's like that it's impossible to teach them that if they're not working with a developer who can actually say, well, there's an API that we can pull, or there's a blah, 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 and these designers are not qualified. I mean, most designers are not qualified to go and research things about APIs. And, certainly if you can do that, you're a special kind of designer. Anyway, I'm curious, like, when you think about some of these hard skills, something that I've always found interesting was, and we talked about this a minute ago, that there's sort of like, I don't know if you call them steps in your career, but there's sort of like, maybe not feelings. I don't know. I don't know the right word to say this, but there's sort of levels or layers, maybe is a good way to say this, where learning hard skills early, and I think Dan Weiner on LinkedIn has talked about this multiple. There's like a diminishing return to learning hard skills. And as you progress in your career, you sort of get to this point where learning hard skills can only get me so far. And, my manager is now looking for something else because everybody can do the hard skills. What is it that will help me excel? And I don't know, as an educator, it's kind of interesting because I wonder if that's even your job to teach that for 5-10 years down the road, or is that something that people just learn on their own? But, is your job as an educator, do you think, to teach them the hard skills, those things now, and then they learn the soft skills? How do you approach that as an educator? I'm kind of curious because it's like you want to teach them everything, but you only have a certain amount of time, and clearly you want to, but do you focus more on hard skills as an educator because those soft skills are so variable based on team? How do you know?
It's tricky. I've taught undergraduates at like sophomore level. I've taught graduate students, and then I've taught this continuing education program. So those are just three very different phases of life, right? Where it can be more of like, the undergraduates, it's just kind of, again, the basics of like creative thinking and color and type and what the elements of graphic design is. So that would be kind of it at a sophomore level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then as you start to get into like, electives and like kind of, getting ready to get out of undergraduate, I do try to prepare them for, you're going to need to think about, managing, if it's not people, like your own work and like teams and collaboration. So I think just giving them a teaser, because I think, a lot of design programs do sit within art schools. So it's kind of like a disservice. I know some programs are now getting situated within like business schools and places where it gives people a better understanding of like how this all relates. Because it used to be more of like a pure formal practice of graphic design. And it's UX is not that anymore. So and then at the higher levels, I don't know, I've had students directly ask that about, preparing for careers. And again, especially the grad students who are, maybe a few years out of undergrad, maybe coming with more of a purpose to grad school. But so I think preparing them, you do have to, it is that 10 years down the road thing where you kind of hit your ceiling or whatever, you hit a choice, an inflection point as an individual contributor, as an IC. Now there are kind of tracks where a lot of the bigger companies are like, IC and manager tracks are like parallel. You can be an IC 7, 8, or 9. But I have a friend like at Google that's like, but there's not actually those roles, So if you want to just be back to your point of like, if you want to you love the craft, you just want to do the craft and not have to deal with all the people stuff. It's possible, but different coaches I've talked to, different people in the field, it's just, those are the harder positions to get, to be like, staff product designer, principal product designer. You just have to be aware that like there's not as many of those jobs if you're working backwards from like a very pragmatist attitude. So I think it's that thing of sometimes, like for me, the industries I chose to work in, the scale of company I chose to work in really defined my career path. I never felt at home in like big tech companies. And so again, if somebody wants that path, they should talk to somebody else. But for me, It's like I love working with startups. I've, done really well with agencies and with kind of early stage businesses. And as a consultant, because, I'm able to kind of like see the patterns and figure out the best process for this situation. So again, I kind of opted out of that whole choice.
So this is, something interesting too. I mean, like when we think about individual contributors, junior individual contributors, I often think about, they're given a specific task. Someone is sort of holding their hand. I need you to go do A, B, and C, and I need it done by Friday. Show it to me on Thursday and we'll review it, And that's like kind of like the junior designer or sort of the junior, really anything, software engineer, whatever. But as you progress in your career, even as an individual contributor, it's more ambiguous. We've got this high level thing. I need you to go solve it. Right. And sometimes you'll go off in a corner and kind of do your work. But what I've found, I was a senior staff in my last role in a big company, individual contributor, but I didn't have reports. I didn't have direct reports. So I wasn't doing the HR, raises and end of year reviews kind of thing, but I was leading a team and I still had to influence. I still had to communicate. So even if you are an individual contributor, I'm sure you've seen this, you're still asked to rely more on those soft skills because as a senior staff, I could say to the junior designer, hey, I need you to go mock this up, or here's some outcome of some meeting. Can you go refine this for me and come up with some ideas, and then we'll see where we can go. So, it was sort of that, like, sort of, I don't know, like it was not a plateau. Maybe it was even like a curve. Like it started to turn downward. Like I did less and less of the sort of mock-ups and pixel pushing. Even though I can do it, it was sort of just, it wasn't my job anymore because I had other people that I could hand that work off to. So it's kind of interesting to sort of think about your career progression and how those skills, different skills, actually help you over time or are something you lean on or not. And I'm kind of curious, as an educator, you're working a lot with 4-year or not 4-year degree always, but it's sort of a long-term, it's not boot camps, right? It's usually
No,
college
recently
level stuff,
again,
right?
it's been this summer. They're kind of intensive where it's a teaser.
Okay.
Sometimes it's career change students trying to be like, I want to switch into UX.
Awesome. So more like boot camp kind of,
Yeah,
right?
a little bit more of
Yeah.
like that has been the more recent thing where it is much more pragmatic and less conceptual.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let me ask you this, as because you've kind of, this is good because I'd love to sort of compare and contrast the long-term degree versus the short-term intensive. Obviously, in those shorter-term intensives, you don't have an opportunity to teach certain things. You have to sort of be very judicious about what you do or do not teach. And I would imagine a lot of times the decision is to teach more of the hard skills. And is that accurate or no?
It could be up to the educator. I mean, again, like I was lucky that SVA kind of, and the class I teach is the practice of interaction design, which is kind of, what that could be anything, right? That could be huge. That could be. So again, I took my lens on it and, in my model of UX, it's like interactions are like the third phase that you go from like these threads of encountering an experience to these impressions of like having it, flash across your retinas to like actually doing something. And that's the core of interaction design versus like graphic design. And then you leave and have some sort of memory. So that's like how I saw these phases. So for me, interaction design was like, yeah, these symbols, the usability, like the paths that are happening. So again, I had this definition I was bringing in point of view that I was bringing to it. And that helped me to kind of show how we were going to do these deeper layers as well as like kind of, yes, we're going to talk about symbols and which ones work and which ones don't. But yeah, I mean, again, I kind of teach as a supplement to my consulting practice. So it's, I can't speak for like someone who's more of like a full-time educator or like, continuing to do these classes because I was just talking with my friend who does online education and yeah, it's tricky. And, the whole like, elephant in the room of AI taking all these kind of low level production roles is also something that educators are really struggling with right now because I mean, I'm sure you've seen the lack of like junior roles available right now, the lack of internships available. So like, it's a really tricky time when you're like, are students gonna have to start paying for junior level jobs because they just like cannot get that experience because it's getting more and more like commoditized that like a senior person is like, well, no, I'll just ask the AI to finish up the rest of these mocks, So we're at a really weird point where I do think the theme I'm hearing is breaking things down. So I love that, places like SVA are doing, sometimes they'll take the semester and they'll have 3 5-week classes, or I think Hyper Island is something similar. Or it's these little blocks where like you can get like a working professional who has time to come in there. Because it's really hard to have a working professional who actually knows how things are being done, who could then also has the time to like prepare a curriculum, interact with students, grade all this, so that's the other kind of like, wizard behind the curtain is like, like thing that's hard to understand is that like, yeah, if you're a full-time educator, you're not going to be in sync with how fast all this stuff is moving professionally. If you're a full-time professional, it's hard to come in and like develop the curriculum that's going to get people to be able to think how you think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so here's a question that I have for you is for those students that might be listening right now that don't have an educator like you who is thinking about these things, because let's face it, a lot of boot camps are just hiring like last year's graduate to teach the next cohort. And so they're not thinking about these things. And if that's the case and that's you, how do you advise those boot camp students to start thinking more about some of these soft skills and less about the, teach me this, gimme kind of hard skill mindset? What would your advice be to sort of help them shift away from that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I think your book is a good manual for that sort of thing.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
But I think at the core of it is collaboration. I'm constantly learning this lesson of stop trying to DIY. We're past the era of like, I'm gonna like make this app and it's gonna go viral in the app store and I'm gonna like, It's like, no,
Wow.
everything's, you have to build a team. You have to have a complementary kind of skill sets. And yeah, you have to be able to deal with other people's opinions. So I think that level of emotional maturity. So I think that's like the core of it, is like, where can I collaborate? Where can I serve? I got a lot of early experience volunteering. I was doing,
Okay.
political stuff. I was making websites for Occupy back in the day.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it's just like a lot of just like, it's not my portfolio piece. It's for this group. It's for someone else. Like, that is the core of what you're trying to learn. And it's, again, very different from the like capitalist pressure of students needing to like get a job and needing to have like, this is what I can do. So yeah, I just encourage people to volunteer, to collaborate, to, it can be, my friend got a job at a big tech company with one piece in his portfolio, which was like for his wife's band, and it was really well
That's
done.
awesome.
And
Yeah.
he used it to show how the web is different now, right? You used to like build your own video player and design your own, audio player, but now you use SoundCloud. Now you embed
Sure.
YouTube.
Yep.
So again, it can just be, find a real client, find a real collaborator. I think it's the best experience.
Yeah, and I also want to just highlight that this blows my mind. You mentioned Occupy back in the day. It's funny that is back in the day now, and like I'm just thinking about it like that was 15 years ago or however long ago it was. It just blows my mind how fast time just seems like yesterday. But so let me ask you this, because here's the other thing. An interesting thing is you've got a lot of these boot camp graduates that have graduated and have gotten jobs, the lucky ones, and they're progressing in their career. And then they hit a ceiling and they can't figure out why they can't get a promotion or whatever it is. And often it's because, just like you said, they're focused on those hard skills, but they haven't really thought about the soft skills, and they're just under this impression that, well, everybody is stupid, everybody's dumb because they don't listen to me and I'm the designer and blah, 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 which is unfortunate, but that happens quite a bit. I'm curious, for those who might be working professionals in that, trying to transition to the mid-level to senior level, what type of advice would you give those former students who never learned those things before they got their career? How would you do that now that if you're in a working job, you have teams? What would be some advice to like maybe start building up those soft skills, those foundational skills?
Yeah, it makes me think of Juliet Cesar, who ran my department at Parsons, said that, yeah, like, people who just did undergrad or just, did your basic education, they're fine to begin with, but it's when you have like a graduate level education, like they do better long term. So it is that like you will hit a situation longer on, like down the road where just like making beautiful things, being able to execute is not going to be enough, and you need, again, a conceptual framework for yourself. So I think it doesn't necessarily have to be grad school, although that is one core way. If you find a program that really resonates, if the faculty there really resonate, recognizing that faculty are coming and going all the time. But so that's, where, the last part of my book was about different thinking skills, about like deconstruction, like framing, diverging, converging, differentiation, these sorts of things where it's about zooming out. I'm very much like a zoom out person versus a zoom in. I think you need both. But so I'm, all for self-education. I did not go to grad school. Like, I have taught grad school. I have developed curriculum for grad schools, and I don't even have a graduate degree. So
Oh, wow.
it's a great field in that if you like to read, if you like to do stuff, like I'm constantly busy, like you can learn, like you can definitely teach yourself these things. Yeah, you just have to, finding the discipline is hard for a lot of people. So I would say finding a community of practice in some form, whether that's, very formal graduate trusted program, or there's like kind of cool online spaces, like Index Space is one in New York that does like kind of online little camps for not necessarily like UX or design. Yeah, there's a lot of different Discords where, so yeah, you can kind of like start to put together, different education. There's like, even LinkedIn Learning has good stuff on there. I'm like, doing little prompt engineering classes here and there. And like, so I think, yeah, like, it's kind of recognizing you're never done. And like, you're at a place where it's like, again, the teacher becomes the student again. You have to go back and like, just assume you know nothing. Just, let go of this idea that like you're senior. I think we get really into like fake it till you make it, like hustle culture of like, I'm here, I'm great. And it's actually more beneficial to be like, again, beginner's mind. Like, I have lots to learn. Like, where can I learn that? Who's a good role model for me?
Yeah. Well, the irony in a lot of these attitudes that I've seen with people who are hitting that ceiling is they claim to be fantastic UX designers and they claim to have empathy for users and empathy and blah, blah, blah. But like, those are the ones who very rarely have empathy for their team and understand where their teams are coming from and why people are asking them to do the thing. It's just combative and fighting people because they think they're smarter and better than everybody. And that idea of Socratic ignorance, of understanding that you do not know everything and there is always more to learn, that is something to keep with you until the day you die, in work, out of work, life, personal life, public life, whatever. That is such an important thing, and I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Always have that beginner's, learner's mindset, and you'll probably do better than you would have ever imagined. So
Yeah,
I love that.
I think empathy is a core, like a great example too. So, it's like the beginning of the design thinking process, right? But when you dig into empathy, it's like there was a nursing scholar, Teresa Weissman, I cite her in my book, of like, there's attributes of it. If it's like understanding the other person's perspective, like reflecting it back to them, like not judging their feelings, so empathy is a practice, meaning like it takes minutes of your day, it takes hours of your day. So again, recognizing that these soft skills are not like, I'm not an empathetic person, right? It's that I take the time to do those things which give me empathy. So you're carving out that research that maybe feels like obvious, you're carving out that time to listen to users, even though you're pretty sure you know what they need.
Mm-hmm.
It's a practice. And I think that's how we need to think about a lot of these soft skills.
I love it. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about your book. So you mentioned these levels, 2D, 3D, 4D, a couple of times. I want to dig into that a little bit and how this sort of applies to, all of what we're talking about today. The hard skills are important, obviously, but so are the soft skills. So 2D, 3D, 4D. I don't want to give away any spoilers, by the way, go buy the book. It's an awesome book. But at a very high level, if you could just talk a little bit about how you see 2D, 3D, and 4D kind of all fitting together to ultimately create a great experience for users.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that, I saw kind of these 4 phases of UX. So I was working in an accelerator, like this big corporation, Fortune 100 corporation had an internal accelerator. And I was like, how do I explain UX to like a corporate audience? And so that's where these 4 phases of like threads and then impressions and then interactions and then memories came about. And then I was like, okay, but like, what are we making? When people ask you to do UX design, it can be anything, right? It can be like a scribble. It can be like a super high fidelity prototype. So I was, again, started to say, well, okay, yeah, there's 2D elements, right? So there's these elements that exist on the screen of like, we see some words, we see like them arranged in space into a layout, we see the images, we see the symbols. So that's, how I started to be like, that's the materials we're working with. But then also the secret that they don't actually exist, right? It's just pixels like flashing in our eyes. It's just like a grid of dots.
Yeah.
So
it's
true.
Yes.
Right. It's like, that's the trippy part.
There is no interface.
Right. It's all just imagination. But yeah, so then beneath that, as we start to level up as a UXer, we often start to think about like inclusive design, right? We think about responsive design. We think about usability. And then I think personalization is kind of really overlooked. So those are like, that design exists on a 3D device, right? Which is in a room, which might be bright or dark or loud or quiet, it's like shared. So all these things about the physicality of the space and the culture that design is inhabiting and trying to serve. So that's kind of like the deeper layer where, again, I think a lot of designers have started to realize they need to like recognize these things, bring things like accessibility into their practice in a regular way. And then, my thesis was, though, that we even need to think another layer deep it's about time, that this is like the core that makes digital design different from, again, print design. I mean, print has some element of time, but the core of digital design is it's like these moments that we remember, right? You don't remember like a forgot password flow. You remember like, wow, I bought a new car. Like I did. Yep. So we have to create these like flashbulbs of moments for people to remember this experience once they leave. They got there through some path, which might've been unique to them. We have to think about all these like different winding journeys. There were different patterns, the rise of design systems. It's not just like these individual, screens we designed in Photoshop anymore. It's like, complicated component systems. And then, if you're lucky, you've actually built a relationship. So you don't treat someone the same as when they're first showing up to your app, as to when they're there for 50 times, right? It's like, if your friend was like, hi, like introducing themselves every time, it would be a little off. So, so how we have the technology now to really get much more personal and really build relationships with people. So that, to me, is like the core of it. So yeah, that was just something that helped my students kind of frame like, where are we talking about? We're talking about interaction design, that's in this quadrant, and what are the 2D, 3D, and 4D layers. So basically, when you're designing for any of those phases, maybe you're thinking about how do we get people in? What are these threads? It lets you think about the deeper layers at any of those moments, or it helps you remember the sequencing. So if you're working in the 2D layer, if you're working in the 3D layer, you can again think about like the sequencing of those phases. So yeah, so it helped me, it helped my students. But the book is very dense. It's
Yeah, it's great. I love it. Is it meant to be more of like a textbook, or is it more like,
it's
would you
more,
see that? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I know. I thought of it as the TikTok of textbooks, where I wanted it to be something where you could just pick it up.
Short form textbook.
Yeah, where it's a lot of like, you could tear a page out and just learn that page. You can just read a paragraph. Because again, our brains, like, we're not really built to like sit and read through an old school textbook anymore. So again, the framework lets you kind of be like, well, I've done usability for 10 years. I don't need to read that chapter. But personalization, like, yeah, I want to dig deeper on that. So it was designed that work like higher level professionals, experienced professionals could dig into certain chapters, or like more new designers could have this framework to kind of like see how the pieces fit together. Because I think that's really hard for young designers, is there's all these Medium articles, there's all these tweets, there's these Instagram videos, and like they need a mental model for how to fit all that learning together. So again, it gives you kind of like the overview, which can be helpful in and of itself, or like you can dig in to a certain topic or just sentence. And then it's also super visual. There's like over 500 illustrations, because again, awesome. I just feel like you can't learn this stuff by speaking. I tried to like diagram and show as much as tell.
Yeah, I love it. And this is something I've also been sending the link to buy this book for some of the students I work with in the boot camps, because this is sort of one of those things, like you join a boot camp and there's often a curriculum and there's a lot of documentation and some online platform. But, it's always good, I think, to have a book, a reference material like this to supplement those other things that you're learning, I think, in the boot camp. So if you're a boot camp student, I think this is an awesome opportunity to pick up the book and learn a lot of those hard skills that you're going to need as a junior designer. But you also touch on the soft skills of the book too, which, again, as we've been saying the whole time, like, these are also equally important. And it's interesting. I was talking with somebody the other day about, why do hard skills, or why do soft skills get such a bad rap or get overlooked so often? And it's interesting in like academia, we talk about, the science and there's measurable and it's very objective, and, those become the hard skills. But the squishy, the sort of, like, oh, it's very subjective and it's hard to teach, and, you can't really assign a framework to something like that. So it's like the soft skills. There's you'll learn it as you go in real life, and sink or swim, kid. But it's just interesting how those things are just, I don't know, just the comparing and contrasting them is just fascinating. Kind of I've heard from like a philosophical level.
I've heard some people start to call them foundational skills to try to give them more emphasis to, not just the dichotomy of like soft is not as valuable.
I love it. All right. So, Erica, we've had you for a little while now. I got some questions that I'd like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. But before we do that, anything else related to this idea of hard versus soft, or hard versus foundational skills that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you think anybody listening might need to know?
No, I think it's like that. Yeah, that, we're in a field studying and serving human behavior. So you have to know other people, you have to know yourself. So it's a lot about developing your own point of view, starting to know yourself and what works for you and what type of designer you are. So both of those studies. So when we talk about these foundational skills, recognize it's also personal development, again, personal, just like self-awareness. And those are, again, extremely valuable job skills as well, that like hiring managers want, to see self-awareness, curiosity, the ability to take feedback, a hunger for learning. So all these kinds of things you just do to like mature as a person are making you a better designer as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I've definitely learned a lot. I'm excited to have you come on and talk about it. So before we get out of here, like I said, I got a few questions I'd like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. The first thing that comes to your mind, you don't have to think too hard about any of this stuff. The first thing that comes to your mind, first up, what is your favorite non-design?
My gosh, I read a lot, so that's like hard to say. For fiction, I guess the Border trilogy is like Cormac McCarthy. It's like sparse and beautiful cowboy book is the first thing that comes to mind. I'll stick with that. I'm like, what actually keeps I got rid of all, in my house cleaning, I got rid of everything, all the books I can get at the library. I'm like 3 blocks from the main Brooklyn library. So I'm like, so yeah, if it's at the library, it gets to live over there. So.
Yeah, we before we moved, we used to live in New Orleans, and I had this long hallway down one side of my house, and we had 7 or 8 bookshelves all along that hallway, and we would just buy books and collect books, and used books, new books, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And when we moved, we had to move across the country, and it was just like, what are we gonna do with all these? I have nowhere to put all these books.
Yeah.
We ended up like donating a lot of the books and giving them to friends and whatever library, donating them if we could or whatever.
Yeah.
And we did the same thing. So now in our new house, it's like we don't have all the bookshelves like we had before. And I kind of miss like all the books everywhere.
The visual reminder is really helpful. It is. I really didn't give enough weight to that. But again, I live in like a 400 square foot New York apartment. So I just had to kind of make some choices. Oh, but another one I just thought of, I would say my favorite author might be Michael Pollan. And just like I've read all of his books. So if that tells you something. I just think his approach to nonfiction is so beautiful that he has this structure where often it's like a 4-part structure, where he studies like the 4 elements or like the 4 types of agriculture. But then the way that he brings it is so empathetic and so poetic. I love how he tackles nonfiction subjects.
I love it. So what is he? I'm not familiar with Michael Pollan. What kind of stuff does he write about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the book that kind of launched him was The Omnivore's Dilemma about like, should we eat meat or not? That was like a while ago. He just did one on psychedelics. That's really interesting about, and he goes, he tries everything. He did one, it's a lot about food and gardening and just
Right on. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I just Googled him as you were talking, and I've seen a lot of like things related to food. That's awesome. I had never heard of Michael Pollan before, but
he's great.
I have to check that out. I love it. All right. Next up, what is your favorite non-design podcast?
Goodness, another hard one. I never get tired of The Moth. That one, that one just maintenance phase for making me laugh. They tear down different diet culture things, and just the 2 hosts are just hysterical. That's I think the one's top of my list right now.
And being in New York, I don't know if I thought they recorded it in New York. Have you ever been to a live taping of The Moth?
I have actually, in the basement of the Cooper Hewitt. Yeah, it's really special if anybody gets to go. It's just the stories are always amazing.
Yeah, I love that. One of my goals, just not exactly the same, but the live, I get just stuff that comes on NPR, but live taping stuff. One of my goals in life is to get taping to Wait, Don't Tell Me. So it's on my list.
Yeah.
At some point I'll be able to do it, but make it to Chicago.
Yeah.
All right. What is your favorite meal? This could be something you've cooked, something you've had at a restaurant, your grandma used to cook. You're in New York. You got a lot of options for favorite meals.
These are the tough ones. This is a funny one, but it's meatloaf, which is like an old school kind of like, where like I just have like, I don't know, when it's done well, it's just my favorite thing, my favorite comfort food in the world. And so I'm still trying to be able to cook it, but like not there yet with anything remarkable.
So I love a good meatloaf, but I don't know if you've ever had, you're talking about like a classic American meatloaf with like ketchup glaze. Okay.
Exactly.
So that's really, I love meatloaf. Well, before I talk about the other thing, have you ever had a meatloaf sandwich?
No.
Or like a diner meatloaf. So like they take a slice of meatloaf and they grill it like on a flat top, so it gets like crusty.
Yeah.
Like the crust, you get the kind of Maillard reaction, and it gets sort of seared, and so it's a little crunchy on the outside, soft. Anyway, meatloaf sandwich with just like some lettuce, tomato, mayo. It's so good on like sourdough bread
next
or something,
level.
or a bun. Anyway, try that. But hackbraten. You ever had hackbraten?
No.
Which is German meatloaf. So it's German. It's all these American food comes from like European immigrants and stuff, but it's originally German, and they serve it with spätzle. Like a big thick egg noodle with like a mushroom cream sauce and sauerkraut or cabbage or something, and it's fantastic. If you've ever had hackbraten, it's so good. You can probably find a recipe online, but anyway, like the German version, it's really
adding
good.
to the list.
Add it to the list. All right. I could geek out on that all day. All right. What is your favorite vacation spot?
That's Costa Rica. I've been 3 times. It's my happy place. Like,
what part?
I go to the south end. I'm like where it's the rainforest. Like I go and there's like 4 kinds of monkeys and like the caiman little alligators and the parrots. It's just like living in the zoo. So it's just magical. Yeah,
I love it. My wife and I did Manuel Antonio. We did the cloud forest, and we did Arnal volcano. So we did like a whirlwind trip in like a week. It was honestly a little overwhelming, but we rented a car and we went all. The cloud forest is beautiful. We stayed at this. It's like the former president had like a dairy farm, And it was a working dairy farm, so they had like cows and stuff there. But you had your little like casita, but like at night the clouds would come through because you were up in the mountains, and the clouds would come through, and it wasn't fog, it was clouds. Anyway, really, that was beautiful. We haven't been since we've had kids, but my goal at some point is to go again without the kids, leave the kids home, and make it back to Costa Rica. That was amazing. We had so much fun.
Yeah.
All right, what is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
I mean, I designed my book in Figma to start, so it's hard because I definitely
Did you? Okay.
I mean, I moved it over to InDesign eventually, but you know,
okay.
my favorite design tool, I mean, honestly, it's probably like Google Sheets. I am like, that's my other love, is just like a good, you know, I'm like, oh, half of these apps could just be a spreadsheet. Where again, really just breaking things down, really just setting as far as like a tool to just help you organize things and have the densest amount of information possible. That's usually a spreadsheet, you know, and then it usually goes into some other format, but I find that really helpful.
Yeah, Google Sheets is so much easier to use than Excel. I don't know if it's just like my mental block of like Microsoft apps, but I just find the way that Google has laid out everything and how they present the formulas and all that other stuff, formatting, auto formatting, all that stuff, is just so much easier to figure out in Sheets than it is in Excel.
Yeah.
I don't know. Usually if I get like an Excel sheet on work or from work, I'll like upload it to Google Drive or whatever and use Sheets to modify it. Or
because it's like the just enough version.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. Excel is just so overwhelming. But all right. Erica, this has been amazing chatting with you. I've had such a good time, learned a whole lot. I really appreciate it. I think a lot of people are going to be able to listen to this and take some key things away. If you're in a boot camp and you aren't learning the soft skills, for the love of God, get out there, learn the soft skills, get Erica's book. One more time before we get out of here, Erica, let everybody know where they can find you, where they can follow you online, get the book, and all that stuff. Give yourself a plug.
Yeah, sure. EricaHeinz.com has links to everywhere. So if you want to find the book, if you want to find me on socials, etc. It's just like the best place. The book's out in hardcover and as an ebook as well. It's full color. It's a guidebook. It's, again, because I self-publish, it's not cheap, but it's, I swear, worth it. Yeah. Happy to chat with you.
Again, that's Think in 4D, Design Brilliant User Experiences and Valuable Digital Products. And you can definitely get on Amazon and a bunch of other places. Erica, once again, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was fun.